I
Okay,
think that
so
makes sense.
that means that logic is not the way that it is because it's rooted in God's nature. Quite the opposite. God's nature is the way that it is because it's rooted in logic. God cannot be what he is not. This isn't something that God decided upon. This is the way that he must be. This is the way that he just simply is, right? Which is what brings us to the
Sure.
logical necessity of it. When you say that the impossibility, the contrary of your proposition is impossible, you're invoking logic. So what is the logical necessity of God being real? Why is it logically necessary that God exists? Because as a verbal spoken statement, there is no incoherence in God doesn't exist. That's a meaningful, substantive statement that everybody understands. It may be a false statement. It may not correspond to reality, but it doesn't internally contradict itself. Not like circles are not round would, or 2 plus 2 doesn't equal 4. Those statements internally contradict themselves. What we mean by 4 is the value of 2 plus 2. So saying that 2 plus 2 does not equal 4 is just saying that 4 is not 4. That's a meaningless statement. It contradicts itself. What we mean by circle is round. So saying that circles are not round is a meaningless statement. But the only way you can make that comparison to God is if what you mean by God is a thing that exists, at which point you're using existence as a property, and that in and of itself is logically incoherent.
That existence is a property. Property is incoherent, you said?
Yeah, you wouldn't do that in any other semantic sense. Like, it wouldn't make any sense for me to say something like some tigers are white and some tigers are not, or to, like, that's a meaningful statement. There are tigers that are white and tigers that are not. But the statement, some tigers exist and some tigers do not, is not a meaningful statement. There are no such thing as non-existent tigers, right? The moment that you invoke
Yeah.
existence as a property, non-existence becomes a dispositive property, just like red and not red are dispositive properties of one another. So a thing can be red or not red, right? That's a fundamental, like, that's a meaningful description about what it is as it is in and of itself, right? Like bumpy, hollow. It can be bumpy or it could be hollow, or it could be
So you're
soft or
saying,
smooth, things like this. And it can also be none of those things, but it still
so
is something. The moment that you say that a
so
non-existent thing can be non-existent, that's silly. That doesn't mean anything. Non-existent things don't have properties in the first place.
okay.
Sounds like I'm in a math class. Sorry.
Yeah. I don't I yeah, no, I agree. I just don't understand saying that. So when we say existence is a property or like, okay, I'm trying to think about this in my and I'm like going,
Well, let me help you. I want you to
yeah,
conceive of in your mind right now a red apple. You got that?
yeah,
Now think of an existing red apple. Did that change anything about the concept?
no,
There you go. That's why existence isn't a property. Properties change things about concepts. They inform you as to what the concept is. Saying that a thing is what it is because it exists is meaningless and incoherent. All right? You could do that with anything. Unicorns exist because I define unicorns as a thing which exists. Well, I haven't told you anything about what unicorns are, and just because I say it's something that exists doesn't mean that what a unicorn is actually manifests in reality. No, existence is not a property. It's the condition by which things fulfill properties, right? So when I say something like a unicorn doesn't exist, what I mean by that is there is a property set we have identified as unicorn, and there is nothing in reality which fulfills that property set. Okay? Existence itself is not what I mean by a thing when I'm talking about it. Otherwise, we couldn't have meaningful conversations about mythological creatures, for instance. Like, what I'm talking about when I say minotaur or unicorn or leprechaun. But that doesn't mean any of these things exist. You're familiar with the property set. You know what describes these beings if they did exist, but the fact that nothing in
yeah,
reality manifests those properties means it doesn't exist, because existence isn't a predicate that way. You can't use it that way. And Immanuel Kant got it right when he pointed that out 300 years ago. It's been pretty uncontroversial in philosophy ever since, which is why modern theologians do not attempt to define God into existence this way anymore. So when you say that the impossibility of God's existence, like the God's existence is impossible, What you're saying is that God exists by definition, which in and of itself is impossible. That's incoherent. And if you define God as a thing which exists by definition, well, then you've defined a square circle or a one-ended stick. God at that point does not exist by definition. Nothing can exist necessarily by logic. They can only exist in conditional relationships with other things.
Whoa, wait. I thought like the laws of logic are itself a necessity, because if you deny logic, you're using it. Or like
No. I'm
truth,
not saying the laws of logic aren't a necessity. I'm saying that things can't exist by logical necessity. Logical necessity can't refer to objects, only propositions, right?
But
like-
doesn't the existence of the laws of logic or logic on the existence that, like the statement of truth, doesn't by necessity those things have to exist? Because to deny that, you'd have to affirm them. Right?
Yeah. So that's what's called tautological self-affirmation. The distinctions between true or false are only meaningful if we're presupposing the laws of logic as our framework, classical logic. Okay, so you can't have a conversations about these things without assuming this is true. Okay, this has to be true. But hold on, this is a different category, right? This is what's called the category error. Because when I say that things can't exist by logical necessity, I'm not referring to tautological self-affirmation, because that's not a thing which exists. Those are prescriptive instruments of human thoughts. The laws of logic aren't a thing. They're a language that we use to describe the universe. Okay? The word logic itself is an arbitrary string of sounds and letters. It doesn't mean anything in and of itself. We have to come along and assign meaning to it. And what we mean by logic is the fundamental behavior of things that exist. And that behavior will continue independent of whether or not we're there to observe it. But the question is, does that behavior have to continue? And we presuppose it does. That doesn't mean it actually has to, but we're incapable of conceiving the world if it didn't. Now, when it comes to the necessity of God, you would have to be violating the laws of logic to use existence as a property. The statement, God does not exist, isn't logically contradictory. The only way it could be is if you use existence as a property, at which point you are committing a logical contradiction. So either you implode the laws of logic in on themselves by making this statement, or you abandon the statement. It's your choice.
I don't know. Okay, I'm dumb. Be honest. So I'm like thinking this out. So I don't know what to say.
If existence is a property, and I say something like Zeus does not exist, I have invoked a thing, Zeus, which does not possess the property of non-existence, or which does not possess the property of existence. But things that don't exist don't possess any properties. There's no such thing as Zeus. Zeus can't have properties because he doesn't exist. If existence itself is a property, Zeus could have the dispositive property of non-existence, which is a logical contradiction, because at that point Zeus both exists and does not exist at the same time.
Say again. If Zeus himself is what?
If existence can be used as a property, then the statement Zeus does not exist means that Zeus exists. It creates a logical contradiction, because only things which exist can have properties. And if existence is a property, non-existence is a property. So anything that doesn't exist has properties and therefore exists.
Okay, well, the idea of Zeus is a property, but Zeus himself is not existent.
No, the idea of Zeus is an idea, right? Zeus is a thing in our imagination which has a particular property set. When I say that Zeus doesn't exist, what I mean by that is that there is not a thing in reality which possesses the properties of Zeus, okay? But if existence is one of those properties, I've committed a logical incoherency, because Zeus does have the property of non-existence at that point, which means he does exist and not exist at the same time. It's incoherent, which is why we can't use existence as a property.